Welcome to the Revenue Builders Podcast, a weekly show featuring B2B sales leaders and executives. Hosted by five-time CRO John McMahon and Force Management co-founder John Kaplan, the show goes behind the scenes with the people who have been there, done that, and seen the results. If you enjoy our content, please subscribe, rate, and review the show to help us reach more people. Revenue Builders is brought to you by Force Management. We help companies improve sales performance, executing the growth strategy at the point of sale. Find us at forcemanagement.com. Enjoy today's episode.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Revenue Builders Podcast. I'm John Kaplan. I'm joined by my great friend, five-time CRO, the author of the best-selling book, The Qualified Sales Leader, John McMahon. Johnny, how are you?
Doing great, Cap. Doing good, buddy.
Awesome. Hey, Johnny, I believe our listeners are in for a big treat today. They're going to be a ton of learning and golden nuggets here. Keep this one on save. If you're out there walking the dog or riding in a car, I think you're going to want to go back to this one for some great nuggets. So, Johnny, we've done some great episodes on champions and economic buyers. I think these topics are as old as dirt, and they'll be around long after you and I are gone. We have done several episodes on this topic, so we'll have the producers put those links to those episodes in the show notes. So it's going to be a really chock full. But what I'd like to do is today, what I'd like to do is to focus on the more of the how. I think we've done a lot on the what and the why of this topic, and we'll do a little bit more of that. But I'd like to talk a little bit more today on digging in on how. And, often, Johnny, I hear people talking about champion building as an event. Today, I'd like to focus on the process of, the processes involved and not just the events. So kick us off with kind of your top level thoughts on this discussion.
Well, I think there's a number of different parts to the process of identifying, educating, building, testing, and understanding if you have a champion. But the first part, I think, in identifying a champion is the when. And it starts right in the beginning. It's during the discovery stage where potential champions are identified. And, they don't have a hat on that says, champion. That's the first thing to understand. The second, which is simple enough, but the second thing to really understand is that they're smart, they're cagey, and they're not going to attach themselves to some unprepared salesperson. So what they're doing is they're sitting back, watching different sales reps come into the account, and they're watching. And the rep's ability to find a champion starts with the rep finding and quantifying mission critical business pain during the discovery process. And why is that so important? It's because the champions want to attach themselves to the solution of a major business pain. Because, as we'll talk about probably later, that they get a personal win out of it.
Yeah. So for those of you listening, we're obviously hearing from one of the greatest minds on qualification and champion building, and John McMahon, the author of the best-selling book, The Qualified Sales Leader. So if you haven't, I can't imagine anybody listening to this hasn't heard of it or gotten it already. But if you haven't, go ahead and pick it up, and this will reinforce. John does such a great job of talking about these processes through a story that is that's just really, really cool. So let's go back a little bit, Johnny, and talk about.
Well, you wanted to talk about the how. I went to the when first. I mean, we can start to talk about how you identify.
Yeah.
Champions.
Well, first, before you do that, just talk to me about, let's get grounded on a definition, because I see so many people saying, okay, a champion is this, a champion's that. What's your definition for a champion? And this is pretty critical.
Okay, so a champion typically has political power or technical respect or domain expertise inside the account. That gives them something that other people don't have. It gives them influence in the account, and that influence in the account gives them access to the economic buyer. And that's the person that we want to meet with, because that person, the economic buyer, has this discretionary use of the funds, meaning, especially if you're a startup and you're selling a product or a service, your product or service is not in the budget. So typically you're going to want somebody that can move dollars around in the budget. That's the economic buyer. And essentially what you're doing is you're stealing budget from some other place. And in order to do that, you have to attach yourself to a pain. You have to get a champion. You have to build a business case and a cost justification to justify why they should move dollars from some other funded project onto yours.
Yeah. So, sorry. Let me kind of paraphrase a little bit. I want to see if you'll allow me to use this definition going forward or tweak it as you see fit. But for me, I've always looked at it as they have power and influence. We'll talk about what that looks like, because people don't, okay, power and influence, but what does that mean? But they have power and influence. They're actively selling on your behalf. And I'm looking for evidence here. And we want to talk about, what does that mean? How does that look like? What is the how behind that? And they have a vested interest in your success, not because they like you, but because there's something in it for them for you to be successful. So would you, first of all, do you like that definition? And then secondly, I'd like to dig into it and look for some examples.
Well, let's get to that. But, you first asked me a little bit on the how, right?
Yeah.
You want, because I think we're going to get to
let's do this. Let's do each one of those and tell me the how. Okay. They have power and influence. Johnny, how do you know somebody has power and influence?
I don't know yet, because I'm in the beginning. I'm doing discovery, So
Yeah.
My discovery is I'm really thinking of myself as an investigator, right? I'm resisting discussing my product or in discovery.
Yeah.
I'm trying to fully understand and confirm their pain. I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of the customer, in their pain, how they're measured and how they're paid. And then through effective investigating, I have to be what I call, in the customer conversation. And I can't expect to just walk in and just barrage the customer with a million questions, right? I have to there's an art to this discussion. There's me asking them questions and then reading the room and reading the one person that I'm talking to and understanding when, after they give me a bunch of information, it's like quid pro quo. When am I going to be able to, I have to give them something back. So maybe I have to tell them, oh, we have other customers that had the same pain that you just told me about. And here was the before scenario and here's the after scenario. So there's an art to this customer conversation. And to be immersed in that customer conversation, I have to walk into it cold. What do I mean by cold? Like I have to know the customer's use case. I have to know the pains in the use case. I have to know without thinking, open-ended discovery questions. I have to know my company's unique product differentiators. I have to know how my product differentiators align to their pain. I have to know the typical quantifiable value of my solution. And then, like I said before, you have to have the customers before and after success stories from prior customers. And once I have a cold understanding of that stuff, now I can actually immerse myself in the customer conversation and truly listen without thinking. If I have to think instead of listening, then I'm not understanding. If I have to think, then I'm not feeling the customer and what they're really telling me. So I can't really have a valuable conversation with the customer. And therefore, I'm never going to draw out a champion because they're like, this person's unprepared. I'm never going to attach myself to them. I'm not showing my cards because I'm smart. The reason I have influence in this account is because I'm protecting my reputation. In the past, when I went to the economic buyer, I went there with a prepared salesperson. We got the dollars. We made the project successful. And I built my reputation further. And I'm not going to chance it on somebody that's not prepared.
So
and
good.
immersed in the customer conversation.
So good. Let's talk about some of these questions because I want to give the listeners a feel for what you hear back. What you're saying is being so prepared in the discovery process and immersed in the conversation that you are ready to listen. And I don't want people to blow over that because what you're listening for are some certain indications of whether or not this person has power and influence. Could you give me some examples of that? I'll start off with just an example. Like, let me give you just one. You're asking about a critical business issue that the company is facing and how it kind of connects to the technical capabilities that and they look at you like you got four eyes.
Yeah.
They're not connected to the business issue. They're not emotionally connected to the business issue or what they do for a living and how it impacts that. That's a huge red flag for me. Can you give some additional ones?
Well, if they don't know, like who's working on critical projects inside the company, who's been assigned to complete, new initiatives, who the C-level executives might confer with on critical company decisions, those types of things. If they don't know really what's going on and they can't give you any indication of what something might cost or how deep that pain is and helping you quantify some of the pain, you probably are attaching yourself to the wrong person. But remember, even before that, you have to build yourself some trust with this person before they may even share any of that information with you. If you're an unprepared sales rep and you're just going in and trying to get access to information on how much things cost the company, they're not giving it to you. You didn't earn any trust yet.
Yeah. So let's talk about the difference, the how here. It's really critical that you're listening to this. Just because somebody's not giving you the information you're looking for does not mean they don't know it. So could you dig in a little bit more there, John, and how do you kind of figure that out?
Well, first let's talk about how we do it, right? How we do it is, like I think I said in the book, is, in discovery, great salespeople, they imitate great lawyers, right? So if you think about a great lawyer, I'm going to put John Kaplan on the stand. I'm literally going to lead the witness through carefully crafted questions, right? Through meticulous questioning, I'm going to try to get Kaplan to admit certain things, right? So I'm very precise with my questions. And that's why you have to be so prepared when you go in as to what their pains are, what their use case is, and probably have done some homework on the person to understand how they're measured and how they're paid. And a great lawyer is basically not going to ask questions that they literally almost don't know the answers to. And that's what I mean about being totally prepared, in that customer conversation. So you have to be completely prepared, total preparation, and, without hesitation, you have to understand the customer's use case and how your product differentiation will lead to a potential solution for that customer.
So I love this. I love that a lot. And again, we're talking to John McMahon, author of The Qualified Sales Leader. And a lot of this comes alive in a story that he tells about a company and their QBR process and their development process. It's so awesome. I want to get on this stickler one because I've seen reps. I've been on calls with reps before, and the customer's obviously not giving them information, not because they don't know it, but because they don't trust the seller. One of the things I say, Johnny, is when I felt that, there's always for me, it's just like being real. And words that are spoken from the heart enter the heart of all who hear them. I believe this. And so sometimes when I feel like a potential champion is not answering me because they don't trust me, I just call it out. And I say, Mr. and Mrs. Potential Champion. I don't say that, but I'm just identifying the person here. So Mr. and Mrs. Person, I feel like that I'm asking you questions that you are not comfortable giving me the answer to. I feel like you know the answers to these questions, but I'm not sure whether you trust or not. Could you just give me some feedback on that, Mr. and Mrs. Customer? And I like just calling it out, just being real and calling out. A lot of people say, you're asking me questions about our company and our leadership and our strategy. I don't even know who you are. So no, I'm not comfortable with that. John, have you seen that? Like just getting to that level of basics of, calling it out. Some reps will just keep going and they won't get any information at the end. They're like, oh, that guy or person did not open up very well.
Right. Well, look, I think that champions evaluate trust based upon their expectations of value, and it starts with you as the salesperson. So, has dealing with this salesperson developed any quality of trust, right? has the salesperson, demonstrated that they understand their product and what a successful implementation of it looks like? Do they feel to me like they're a true business partner, that they're in my shoes, not in their own shoes, right? So first is the value of the salesperson. Then they're starting to look at like the value of the solution. Do I believe that this solution is going to solve my business problem? Do I believe that the ROI on this solution is going to give me a healthy return? Do I believe that it's going to meet my business goals? And then the third part that I think they look at is the value of the company. Do I think this company, when I'm going through the implementation, like after I bought the product, are they going to perform and help me get through a successful implementation, or are they going to walk away from me, right? So where has the company done this before? Have they done it with similar sized companies? Do they have references that I can check? All of these three things, the value that you're bringing as a salesperson, the value your company brings, and the value of the solution are all going to be tested by the champion before they're really going to be on your side big time.
Yeah.
And you have to understand those things. Otherwise, why would they give you any information? You don't deserve it. You haven't built trust.
Got to earn it. You got to earn it. Trust is earned, right? That's what you're saying.
Yes.
Trust is earned.
Yes.
So the next thing that we were talking about a little bit on the definition was actively selling on your behalf. I hear people say it, and then I say, okay, what does that mean to you? And they can't tell me what that means to them. What does actively selling on your behalf mean to you? And what evidence would you be looking for? Let's say you're doing a forecast session with me, and I say, I have a champion. You say, walk me through how they're actively selling on your behalf. What do you mean by that?
Well, now I think you're almost getting we're getting pretty far advanced so far, I think, because you're talking really about testing the champion, right? So, I can ask them how items are purchased at their company. I can ask them, walk me through a typical evaluation process for a new software product. Who's made the last, major purchases at this company? Can they help me map out the as is scenario and the to be scenario? Can they explain the implications of not solving the pain? Can they explain, what the competition solution does to provide business value versus mine? Those types of things. But actually at that stage now, you're testing your champion. You believe you have a champion, and now you're testing.
Okay, so I'm talking about the definition here.
Ask me a question that's way down the line. Like we were in identifying, and we were in, understanding what a champion looks like. And right now we're at testing them.
Hang on. I know how your brain works, Mr. Engineer, but I'm going from one topic to another, and I'm going to swing back around and put it back on the table for you with a bow. So no, we were talking about the definition. Then we're going to get into, kind of how it kind of progresses chronologically. I'm looking for definitions here because it starts with me with a definition, and then the how behind the definition falls apart. So you did a great job explaining to me power and influence. What does it look like? What information do you need to find out, and that kind of thing? The actively selling on your behalf, don't worry about where we are in the sales cycle yet. I agree with you. That's going to come later. But I want to know what the heck that looks like, and what's the how behind. How do you get somebody to actively sell on your behalf?
Well, first you got to earn trust.
Yep.
And then you have to help educate and develop your champion. You have to almost make them an internal salesperson, because when you're not there, they have to basically sell on your behalf. So you have to educate them as to your differentiators, and you have to be honest about your differentiators versus the competition's differentiators. You have to be honest about what people are going to say about you and your company in that meeting, because you got to understand that when that champion goes into a meeting to talk about you and your product and your company, those three values that we talked about, there's going to be a competitor's champion in that same room. And they're going to bring up FUD, fear. What is FUD?
Fear, uncertainty, and doubt.
Uncertainty and doubt about you and your company. And they have to be prepared to answer those questions, or they're going to be embarrassed. So if you haven't, educated that champion and developed that champion so they can basically sell on your behalf when you're not there and handle the natural objections that are going to come their way, you're going to lose that champion, and you're not going to get them back. And
Love
it's
it.
because you didn't do your job. So sometimes I've actually found where a champion says, well, I'm going into this meeting, we're going to talk about, your software. And I say, well, do you want to role play some of the things that they're going to that are going to come up? No, I'll be okay, John. I go, okay. Well, let me just ask you one question. Would that be okay? And they say, yeah. And I ask them one question that I know they can't answer. And they say, I don't know how to answer that question. I go, good. That's why we need to talk about it, because you're going to get asked that question. And if you can't answer it, you're going to get embarrassed.
So
So
what you're
let's see.
talking about, yeah, love it. We'll get into the details of each of these, but what John McMahon, author of The Qualified Sales Leader, is talking about here is really the evidence. All these scenarios that John's talking about is somebody's going to a meeting and they're going to present on our behalf. They can talk about our differentiation. They're ready to explain what we've done or what problems we solve, how specifically we solve them, how we solve them differently or better, where we've done it before. Um, so we've established the definition, and then what's in it for them, we'll come back to that. But I just want to make sure everybody's cool with that definition. Last thing I want to talk about
No,
before we
let me just say, when you're educating the customer, you have to, because we want to put ourselves in the customer's shoes. You're still not selling. So in the initial process of, discovery, you're basically an investigator. And at this point, when you're educating, you're still not selling.
yeah. Okay, so I agree with you 100%. Last thing on this one before we go to developing, educating, and those types of things. First, we started with definition here. I just want the simple one, because 99% of the time when we talk about on forecasts, whether they have a coach or a champion, it really turns out to be a coach. What's the number one reason why do you think that we wind up at a coach? And how do you know that? Like it's like almost almost foolproof. Take the biggest account that you have right now on your forecast that you've got to deal with and really kind of test this, whether you truly have a champion. What does it come down to, John? Difference between coach and champion?
It was down to influence. Who has influence in the account? So I always talk about the fact that there's an organization chart, and you see all the titles of the managers, the directors, and the VPs. Those people have authority in the account. And then there's other people that might be on that org chart that also have influence in addition to authority. And then there's also people that are not on the organization chart. They might be someone with domain experience that has influence. They may be 7 levels down in the organization, but they have access to that economic buyer because of their domain expertise that fits with the product that you're selling. And that influence gives them access to the economic buyer. So if you map out on the x-axis and the y-axis, authority and influence, you'll find that what I always say is stay away from Nina and stay away from Annie. Who's Nina and Annie? Nina is no influence and no authority, and Annie is authority and no influence. And where you want to spend your time is with authority and influence, or no authority but has influence. And that's the way to really look at it. What's the difference between an org chart and a power chart? And I learned this I was lucky enough to learn it really early in sales. I was selling computer-aided design for HP when they tried to get into the business. And I stood with a cup of coffee outside the VP of Engineering's office at General Dynamics. Wait till he came in the morning, because it had his VP of Engineering on the curb right where he pulled his car in. Took my meeting early in the morning and then said, I want you to come back and present to a team of mine. And I said, okay. And like me and other CAD sales, I was selling computer-aided design at that time, there was a director of CAD, and that's where everybody thought that they should sell. Let's go sell to the director of CAD. What you realize is that the director of CAD, if you sold them a system, you were going to create pain for them. They had no pain. The engineers had the pain, right? And the VP of Engineering basically had pain because they have engineering costs, engineering productivity, time to market issues, but the CAD director doesn't have anything. They go home at 5 o'clock and the engineers are left with the pain if they have a bad CAD system. And that all flows up to be really painful for the VP of Engineering. Well, when I show up at the meeting, there's 6 other executives in the meeting. Guess who's not there? The director of CAD.
Yeah.
He told me everything I needed to know. Right there, I realized, oh, wow, there's authority on these org charts, but there's influence, and this dude has no influence with the VP of engineering. So that really set my mind straight, for the rest of my sales career.
Such a good analogy, Johnny. I had one that's not as sophisticated. Yours is are you New Jersey Institute of Technology? What were you, right? New Jersey Institute.
Yeah,
Okay, so
NJIT.
I'm NJIT.
Good school.
No, I'm not. So, Boise State and Bowling Green and the football programs, that's what good schools there that I went to. So,
Sure.
my answer to myself is to get myself kind of ingrained with the difference between the coaches and champions. I like to say that it's like the chicken and the hog at your breakfast. The chicken was involved, but the hog was committed.
Yes.
And I'll give you a moment to reflect on that a little bit. But
I already got that one, brother. The other people need a second. I got it.
I really want to hone in on what John said here is that the difference between power and influence, difference between coaches and champions, power and influence. Just because you know that intuitively, you say, okay, power and influence. John just gave you a great example of how power and influence shows up or does not show up in a meeting. So, all right, let's move on, Johnny, to talk about.
Let's stay on this. You asked why, and I think what happens is a lot of salespeople going in. There's a couple reasons. First of all, they talk to the first person that will speak to them, and they get stuck with that person. And they usually get stuck down low in the tree. If you think about the account as a tree, and then they go out to the far end, the edges of the branches to the twigs, and they find out, oh, I'm kind of stuck. So then they come back, and now they realize, I want to go over this champion's or this who they thought was the champion's head, because they realize, wow, it's really not a champion, it's a coach. And they don't know how to get wide and high in the account. So they get stuck with this coach, and then they put their entire sales campaign on a coach that has no influence in the account. They're never going to get to the economic buyer, and they're never going to get a big deal. Maybe the coach makes them go away with a $50K deal, big deal. What are you going to do? Open up a bank? 50.
Johnny, people, when they hear that scenario, they're like, yeah, screw the coaches. We don't need coaches. We need champions. But the smartest sellers I've ever seen, they come to a realization that they're not with a champion. But the coach, let's do my definition of a coach. They want to see you win.
Yes.
They are giving you information.
Yes.
Biggest thing is that they don't really have power and influence. So how can you utilize a coach to get you to a proper champion?
Well, you can ask those questions like who's working on critical projects, who was recently promoted, who's been assigned to complete new initiatives, because all of those things basically say that someone at the top is basically making those things happen. And that means that person has influence in the account, or those things wouldn't have happened. If I'm the CEO of the company, I'm not putting somebody that doesn't have influence with me on some brand new initiative that I stuck in my annual report.
Yeah.
Right?
But I don't.
One of the things you have to worry about when you talk to a coach is, are they also talking to your competition? Or are they talking to all the salespeople that walk into that account? And are they wasting your time? Or are they giving you the same information that they're giving to the competition?
Now, again, remember my definition.
Know that this coach is dedicated to you, because I've run into some of them that they're pretty good talkers, but there's no action.
That's why I'm very specific on the definition of a coach for me is somebody who wants you to win. They give you access to information. The biggest difference is they don't have power and influence. And I see so many people learn this textbook version of it. And this is what sellers typically do. They forget about the emotional intelligence of what happens. Okay, I'm talking to you. I realize that you don't have power and influence. I'm out of here. And I go over your head. I go around you. I never come back. And guess what happens to those people? They, like Johnny says, other people are calling on them. Other people are trying to put their campaigns on that coach's back. And that coach can still, regardless if they have power and influence, they can still either help you or hurt you. So, Johnny, how do you take somebody forward? How do you take the coach forward with you through the process and not just leave them alone and say, thanks for helping me identify you don't have power and influence. See ya.
Yeah, I play the game. I go back and talk to them all the time. I play the game until I can see what kind of cards they're showing me. But I'm not going to be blindly, putting my entire sales campaign on a coach. And I'm also, to your point, I'm not going to leave them completely alone and make an enemy out of somebody that can actually hurt my sales campaign. So I'm going to keep calling on them, stay in touch with them. But in some ways, I'm not sharing all the information that I might have in the account, right? Because if I'm getting wide and high in the account, what I found out is a lot of these customers start to realize that you know more about some of the political ramifications going on in the account than they do. So they're asking you questions.
I like that.
One of the great places to find champions also, because we mentioned critical projects, strategic initiatives, is in big accounts, there's operations people, right? So, when companies get to a certain size, I even had, sales operations, HR operations, marketing operations working for me. Now, those people know exactly who the movers and shakers are inside the company. Why? Because if I'm the CRO or C-level somebody and I have operations people, I'm trying to get things done. I'm trying to get those initiatives done. And who's working those initiatives for me? Those are the people that have influence. That's where you go and you quickly find out who some champions or potential champions are in the account.
Love that. We're moving into this section. I wanted to talk to you about developing champions. And I know we talked a lot about that before, but could you just kind of summarize for me if you were saying, okay, John, how do you develop a champion? There's some critical things that you've talked about, making sure that you align them to critical business issues and those types of things. But off the top of your mind here, and maybe some examples, how do we develop a champion? So they have power and influence. They're not actively selling in our behalf yet, and they should have a vested interest in our success. We got a good target. How do we develop them, Johnny?
I try to educate them on everything from the competition's product, the competitive traps like we talked about if they're going to go into a meeting, common objections they're going to hear. I show them exactly how to justify my product internally. I might have them speak to other champions inside my installed base. And I love that too, just as a side tangent, because then I'll call my champion inside my install base and ask, what questions did my champion ask? What concerns did they seem to have? And now I know exactly their mindset, what they're really worried about. And based upon the questions that they ask, my current champion inside the install base tells me everything I need to know about them, what they're really worried about, those types of things. And then I arrange, meetings for them to come and speak to some of the executives at my company, All of this really, though, is done in the vein of, educating my champion, not selling my champion again, right? Educating them.
I like that. And I want to reiterate some of the things that you said earlier. Also, helping people attach to the biggest business issue facing them. I think when you wake up in the morning, you got to say, this is what I do for a living. I'm going to help people that I speak to attach themselves to the biggest business issue facing them. I'm also going to help them get emotionally connected to what they're doing for a living and how that's impacting the critical business issues facing a company. Sometimes by how you do this as a seller, you can get enormous trust back from an individual. And the next thing that I think is critically important is when you wake up in the morning, Johnny, you got to say, okay, I know my job is to influence the decision criteria, gather the decision criteria so it's good for the customer. It's also good for us because we're going to influence that decision criteria by our definition and by helping champions and potential champions influence decision criteria for home run for their company. I find that as one of the greatest things that you could do.
Yep.
Okay. I was expecting for you to do a standing ovation there. And so I'm just going to move on. Now,
I can do a little clap.
What'd you say? Your dad used to tell me? Your dad would tell me that.
Yeah, that and a token will get you on the subway. Now get out of here.
That's right. Now get out of here. Okay. We also talked about, John, adding value to them throughout the process. You've talked about proof points, where else you've done it. connecting them to other champions and building their confidence. Do you have any examples of where you've kind of done that? Like you've got a champion, they're trying to build trust, they're in the throes of it, you're in the throes of it, and you said, you know what? I'm going to use another champion in another company or in another industry or what have you, just to give this person some spirit and some confidence. Have you ever done that?
Yeah, like I talked about, and I want to know what questions that they've asked my champion. And sometimes they'll even say to my current champion, what they're worried about. But the questions for me are really key, almost like when I'm interviewing a sales rep or a sales leader. Sometimes the questions that they ask me are more powerful than anything that they can ever say. So I always used to think same thing with my potential champion. What questions are they asking my current champions? Because that tells me almost everything I need to know about them.
Boy, it really does. If they're asking questions around, what it's like to work with this company. I got a lot of that back in the day, back in our company, Bud, where there was the only way that our competitors could sell against us is to talk about how arrogant or how pushy we were. Really, it was for the good ones. For us good ones, it was really a confidence and conviction that we could help somebody. And I was encouraging other champions to, hey, if they don't bring it up, tell them what it's like to work with us. I know there's a stigma out there that, this company might bully you into X, Y, or Z, because that's all our competition had back in the day, Johnny. If you can remember, they only tried to talk about how we did our business versus what we were doing or what the differentiation was. And having those other champions that could do that, I think, is incredibly powerful.
I want to talk about one other thing that you touched on before is why so many sales reps only end up with coaches.
Yeah.
Too many sales leaders are only measuring activity. They're not measuring accomplishment. So they want to go to how many calls did you make? How many emails did you send? And then more importantly, like how many meetings did you have? So if you measure me on only meetings that I have, I'm going to get the meeting. I may not get the meeting with the right person, with the potential champion, or the person or the persona that owns the use case. But I might get a meeting, and now I'm stuck down low with a coach. And it's only because my manager is measuring me more on activities than on accomplishment. And I think that's a big effect on why people end up with coaches.
I do too, Johnny. And
they can't get away from it.
Yeah. And for the leaders listening, okay, most times I find this when I'm talking to people, they intellectually understand what we're talking about, Johnny. They're a leader. They intuitively understand what we're talking about, all these definitions and criteria and what have you. But what they don't understand is the how. We're trying to talk about the how today. Your job as a leader is not to tell somebody they do or don't have a champion. Your job is to help them qualify. Your job is to help them identify. Your job is to help them build champions to get them unstuck. So I want to give some spirit around, for the leaders listening. When I look at MedPick, and those types of things, the leaders that use that as a compliance tool, Johnny, are out to lunch. They say it's a compliance tool. You do or you don't have a champion. That's like such a waste of time. It's like one of the greatest development tools that I've ever seen. Do you agree?
Yes. Yeah, I do.
So when we're listening out there, you make sure you're just not wagging your head, or you maybe already clicked off this podcast and said, oh, they're only talking about, what I already know. No, that's not what we're talking about. We want to take you to a place where you can go somewhere that you're struggling with. If you're a leader, how do you ingrain this? How do you meet your sellers wherever they are to help them get unstuck? I want to just put one last point in here, Johnny, and then I'll ask you to just follow up to wrap a bow on it. One of the other things I like, Johnny, is and this is timing. This is more towards this is post sale typically. I call them champion letters. You've heard me talk about it before. One of the most powerful things I ever learned how to do, I learned how to do it way back when in the Xerox days, is to write the CXO, the economic buyer. Many times I just write to the CEO. I'd write to the highest level person I could find at these big manufacturing companies, these big hospitals, or whatever I was selling at the time. And I would write them a letter, and I would thank them for doing such a great job with getting their people the information about the business issues facing their account, and then how we were able to work with them to create technical required capabilities that solve those business issues. My grandmother used to say, "You don't need the money. She said, you don't need the credit. You need the money." And so I like to think about these champion letters as like, it's the gift that keeps on giving. So what do CEOs hear about every day, John? 90% of the world is complaints.
Yeah.
It's complaints. Stevie didn't do this. Susie didn't do that. I'm unhappy with my billing or what have you. Can you imagine a CEO, CXO opening a letter, an email from you saying, thank you for having such an awesome community of people working for you. And then don't forget, get a proof point in there, have a metric, because today's metric is tomorrow's proof point. This is what they were actually able to do. And that, Johnny, you know how many times I've said that? I'm going to be 61 here coming up. You know how many times I said that in my career, and how many people have actually done it? I can probably count on two hands. How many people over 30, 40 years have ever taken my advice? And I can tell you, Johnny, it has never gone wrong for me. Have I heard back from the president or CEO every time? No. Many times I have. But has it ever backfired that somebody says, why are you writing me a letter? I'm pissed off or what have you? Never. So jump in. The water's good. So
I
wrap
want
up
to jump in and go back to
development.
why people end up with coaches also again.
Yeah.
It's because they don't, in my book, I talk about finding pain above the noise. And
Yeah.
what I mean by that is companies have thousands of pains that they can live with, right? But few pains that they can't live with. They have to, find a remedy for it. Like if you cut your finger, okay, you can live with it. You put a Band-Aid on it, little antiseptic, and you're fine. Now, if you fall down and separate your shoulder or break your collarbone, that needs third-party attention. So are you looking for the problems inside the account that where the pain is major? It's a major pain. It requires third-party attention because it's pain above the noise. And if you're not finding pain above the noise, there's no wonder you're not finding a champion, because they're not attracted to that. They say, anybody could fix that, or we could do a workaround. There's a cheap solution to something like that. I'm not attached. I don't care how good of a salesperson you are. You're small potatoes. I'm looking for the salesperson that's walking in here, thinking bigger, thinking big potatoes, solving major pains, the pains that are going to catch the attention of the CEO of this company, which is always tied to revenue, profitability, and risk. And are they major threats to any of those three items?
Yeah, we should all write that down. That's a big takeaway I had from your book, The Qualified Sales Leader, was, rising above the noise. When I wake up in the morning, how am I going to rise above the noise? What am I doing today? What conversations am I having today where I'm helping the person I'm speaking with rise above the noise? And if you just wrote that down on a piece of paper, you said, today I'm going to help myself and the people I interact with rise above the noise, you're going to be better off than 90% of the people out there that are just sucking the life out of people by asking them stupid questions.
Actually, in the book, I talk about a meeting I had with a CIO where I asked him a question about that. And he said, John, like a lot of people think that I'm a firefighter, but I have hundreds and hundreds of problems. But if I spent my whole day putting out all those fires, I'm a firefighter, but I don't have time for that. What I really am is a forest ranger. I'm looking over the entire, landscape of the properties that I own here, and I'm seeing what's a major threat to us. And I'm only dealing with those major threats. Those little fires, they'll go out by themselves. I don't need to address those things.
So awesome,
I'm
dude.
a firefighter. I'm a firefighter.
Remember that. That's in the book, right? That's in the book?
Yeah. It's based on a true story. It's amazing.
I love that. Johnny, let's move into, it's pretty meaty, but let's move into this testing of champions. And again, people listening, they're like, well, wait, where are we in the timeline? We're not talking about timelines here. We're talking about kind of absolutes that you have to do all of these things. Yes, they begin to progress. Identifying happens typically before you're testing. So I think that makes that makes common sense. We want to just talk about the concept of testing champions now and talking a little bit about the how. How do you test a champion? And let's not go to the first one that everybody says, ooh, 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 I got the answer. Take me to your leader. And because they can't take me to their
to the economic buyers.
Right. That everybody answers that. Well, do they get me a meeting with the economic buyer? Why the heck should I get you a meeting with the economic buyer?
Yeah.
You learn that. So let's talk a little bit deeper about that, Johnny.
Well, first of all, here's another thing that happens is people have not earned trust yet.
Yep.
And then they try to test the champion. You can't test the champion until you've earned trust.
Yeah.
If you haven't earned trust, why are they going to answer any of your questions or ask you or perform certain activities on your behalf? Why? You haven't earned trust yet. You haven't earned trust. You haven't earned respect, and you're asking people to do things for you. Why? Why would they do that? Why are you different than the other 1,000 sales reps that just went in and called on that account? Why?
Yeah.
So if you've earned trust, then, we talked a little bit about, how items are purchased at XYZ, or what's the typical evaluation process of who are the players that are involved in the decision process and who made some of the last few major purchases, or can you walk me through the as-is process today? And together we might be able to work on the to-be process. Can they identify some of the major pains? We were talking about, pain above the noise. Can they identify some of the major pains that are going on inside the company that we might be able to address? And do they believe that my solution brings them any type of value? Where's the business value? Where is it? Can they explain that to me? If they can't explain it to me, maybe I lost them, or maybe they're just a coach.
I like that. One of
and
the
then
things
I can ask them to do activities. I can ask them to range a demonstration into a different department, do a customer reference, help me create the POV criteria, introduce me to legal and procurement, help me craft a cost justification,
good one.
facilitate an introduction into some other, decision makers. Because the champions know other champions. And if they believe that there's something that's beneficial to the company, sometimes they want somebody else in the barrel with them. Because so really, if I'm a high-level business champion, I also need a technical champion that on my behalf can tell me whether or not what John and John are saying about this product is actually true. So is that business champion that you think you have a hold of, do they have a technical champion that is, working for them on their behalf to test your product?
I like that. I like that a lot. And again, in your book, The Qualified Sales Leader, you do such a good job of bringing all these points to life through a story, through a story, so you can get emotionally connected to it. One of my simple brain things, John, is I used to love when I was going through a forecast and somebody would say, we have a champion. I'd say, okay, just consider this for a second. Are we dealing with somebody? Some people can tell you this is what happened today. So there's people that can tell me this is what happened today. There's other people that can wake up and tell me this is going to happen today. And then there's the dreaded person that you might be calling on that wakes up the next day and asks you, what the heck happened? And so I would just do I'd just do it with my sellers. I'd say, what category is that person in? And when you really think about it, that's a good test. It's like, are they aware of what's happening after the fact? Or do they tell you what's going to happen? Or are they looking for you to tell them what's happening? These are tests for me. They're pretty solid tests. You agree?
Yeah, I agree. Actually, the way that I think about the sales process, I think about who's in control. So there can only be the customer in control. I can be in control. The competition's in control. And if I'm not in control, then the competition's in control, the customer's in control. Typically, in the beginning of a sales process, obviously, the customer's in control. Why? Because you want information from them. But if you do, as we talked about, a good job in discovery and earning trust and building a champion, then all of a sudden they're now on your side, but they now need information from you. They need to know more about your product. They need to understand the differentiators, the competition, the competitive traps, all those things that we talked about. So now you're in control. you've gained control now because that customer now needs something from you because they're in the game with you. You do have a champion. And what happens in that event, and it becomes pretty obvious, is your sales process moves from unpredictable to predictable, meaning you used to show up and not know what the hell's going to happen when I show up at this account. And then all of a sudden, you have a really good champion and you know exactly what the next steps are. And they've locked down the decision criteria and they're limiting the competition from getting access to information. And they're blocking the competition from going higher in the account. They're doing all of those types of things. But for you, streamlined. There's your criteria. It's set. The POV happens, on Tuesday at 3:00 and everything's set. Everything's very predictable, just as it's supposed to happen. And that means you're in control. You have a champion. But if you're walking into the account and it's unpredictable and you don't know what's happening, guess what? It's only two other people that can be in control. And the longer that sales process went, competition's in control, not the customer.
Oh, good, Johnny. So good. Hey, we've done a number of different podcasts. We're going to include those in our show notes on access to the economic buyer. We've just done some great ones, and I want you to go back and listen to those. We'll list them here. Johnny, I want to talk a little bit about timing and the how. The way I figure it, getting the economic buyer happens early, during, and after. Do you kind of see the world that way? And then, what would you do early? What would you do during? And what would you do after?
Early, sometimes, if I was aggressive like I was when I was a rep and I'd go stand in a parking lot. A lot of times I didn't really need to get to the economic buyer. I basically knew that they had gatekeepers. And I wanted to understand who could be a potential champion. So I might ask them when I get the gatekeeper or the executive assistant on the line, I'd say, look, I don't really need to speak to Mr. Kaplan today, but I'd like to understand inside the account, who does he or she hold personally accountable for X, Y, or Z? And then they say, oh yeah, that's, Mr. John Flynn. Okay, great. Thank you so much for your help. Bang. I'm calling John Flynn. And I say, hey, I was just in touch with the economic buyer's office, whatever that name is. And, I want to talk to you about X, Y, or Z. Okay.
We're getting a whole path.
50,000 people in this account. I'm down to one person that I know has some sort of big influence because the executive assistant to the C-level person told me their name. And they know. Why did they know? Because when Mr. Flynn calls, she knows to put the call through. Yeah. And when the other, 40,000 people call, she blocks them.
Like that. Right? What I also like, John, early is you just talked about getting a hall pass from the economic buyer, which I love, because so many people, we talk about getting delegated to those that you sound like. And if you're going to an economic buyer and you're asking them questions that you could have got the answers to from somewhere else, you're in bad trouble. And we got a lot of content around that. But I want you to just remember one of the exit strategies in early with being able to be welcome back is a lot of times what I'd like to say is I'd like to rephrase what I heard from the economic buyer. And then I would say, I'm not sure whether we can help you or not. I have a strong suspicion we can. But when we go out and talk to the people that you've suggested, and we get a kind of an understanding on where this could go, would you allow me an opportunity to come back and share it with you? And I got to tell you, John, 99% of the time, that was a favorable conversation. I was acknowledging that the technical aspects or there's things that need to be done that don't require my conversations with the economic buyer, but getting advice when we kind of gather everything to make sure that it syncs up with where that person would expect to see it. I don't think ever, John, that I had anybody come back and said, no, I don't want you calling on me again. You agree with that?
Yeah, I agree with that. Actually, in those meetings with the economic buyers, sometimes I've had the competition's champion in there with my champion.
Yeah.
So I found it was really important to almost like shoot a cannonball across the competition's champion's bow by walking through like the criteria for the POV and what we were going to do and what pains we were going to solve and how we cost justified this. And then at the end, the most important thing was to say to the economic buyer in front of everyone, now, if anything changes from what we just agreed to in this meeting, can I reserve the opportunity to call you back?
Love
And
that.
yeah, sure. Now, what I just did is I sent a cannonball across the competitive champions bow saying, don't even think about changing that criteria. If you even think you're going to change it before the POV, it's not going to happen. I'm calling the
So
big
good.
one,
Johnny,
right?
that's so good. I wanna just kind of we've had just a fantastic discussion here. I want to talk about one of the I want to get your feedback on one of the things I used to love to do in testing a champion, and then I'll ask you for anything we've missed here. What I used to love to do in testing a champion was to role play. I'd first do it with the rep. I'd ask them some questions. They'd tell me we have a champion. They tell me we're connected to the economic buyer. They tell me that they have, connected to business issues. I say, no problem. That's fantastic. Hey, will you allow me to call the champion right now with you on the phone, or we go see them, whatever the environment is, Zoom call, whatever modality you're using these days, and just ask the question. I used to do it all the time. Hey, my name's John Kaplan. I did it at PTC all the time. I am Susan's direct manager. We were talking about you today, and we were talking about the opportunity that's there in front of you. I just wanted to ask you a quick question, if you wouldn't mind. If the CFO of your company walked in the door today and asked you why PTC or why XYZ, what would you say? And then Johnny, typically the champion gets all excited. It's like, oh, I got this one. We love Susie. She does such a great job with, and I'm serious, 99% of the time it goes this way. We love Susie. She does such a great job. She's very responsive. And then I got to remind the person, I'm like, hey, we love Susie too. So thank you for those kind words on Susie. Remember, we're talking about a CFO here. Like, what would you tell them? Why us? And then it starts to break down, Johnny. But you got to do it in a way that lets the person off the hook, because it always broke down. And I'd say, you know what, Mr. Mrs. Champion, we were just role playing this, and it's our fault. Like, we felt like this was going to happen, and it's our fault, because we wanted to go back and just kind of rephrase what we've been doing. And then we just go into the mantra, Johnny, that says, look, you've told us that these are the positive business outcomes you're looking for. Champion says, yes. Well, you've told us that these are the technical required capabilities that you were looking for in order to achieve those positive business outcomes. And then you said you're going to measure success this way. And they're like, yes, yes, yes. They're starting to build confidence. And then, okay, where we come in, here's how we do that at XYZ company. Here's how we do it differently or better than the rest of our competition. And here's where we've done it before. And Johnny, there's such a relief, because they went from, I don't know what to say about you people, to, oh my God, that's perfectly rephrasing what we've done. And the biggest buying signal I've ever gotten, Johnny, on these things is, can you put that in a couple of slides for me? Because that's called testing and building a champion in the same meeting. Okay.
Yeah.
Other thoughts?
Initially, when you're calling and you're Susie's boss, of course they think they want to defend Susie, which is the right thing to do. So they didn't really know the reason for the call until you said, we also love Susie, but let's talk about the business part of it, right? So they rightfully so were trying to defend Susie.
Yes. Johnny, it's been unbelievable conversation. I want to let you wrap up here on any things that we might not have covered. Please, folks, if you haven't, John gets mad when I do this, because he doesn't need to sell any more books, but I'm just telling you, it makes the business world so much easier, and the sales world so much easier, when we're kind of talking about the same examples and the same principles that John does such a good job in this book, The Qualified Sales Leader. Johnny, take us home on this concept today of some of the takeaways for you, and anything
you kind of know when you have a champion, because you've gone through all those steps that we talked about. But more important, what happens is it starts to become really collaborative, because they're now on your team, like we talked about, and they're part of your team. They have a vested interest in it. They have a personal win in it, whether it's recognition, approval, control, money. And what happens is you start to collaborate together on the critical components of the sale. So information starts to flow between you and your champion, almost as if they are on your team, like they're on your sales team. This is what happened in this meeting internally. Here's what the competition's champion's saying about you. Here's what I said. What about this? What about that? And then they also become very proactive. They become invested in you. So they openly are introducing you to other people in the company. They call you to discuss the competition's presentation. They want to speak to customer references. It all starts to become really proactive because they're getting closer and closer to this huge risk day when they're going to have to get to that economic buyer and make the pitch for you. And they're starting to close down any open issues that they have for themselves. So it starts to feel very collaborative on one behalf. And then it starts to become you see them becoming really proactive.
Johnny, I love what you're saying here. And I used to get this feeling when I was a young seller. I would get this feeling like I'm in the middle of the triangle. Like my customer is, kind of struggling with me and I'm struggling with them. My company is struggling with me and I'm struggling with them about qualifying. And I felt like I was all alone. And then when I really figured out what you're talking about, John, on this collaborative nature, I got to tell you, my sales career just took off when I said, you know what? If I truly have somebody that is the definition of a champion, where they have power and influence, they're actively selling on my behalf, and they have a vested interest in my success. And I understand that happens over time. But if I truly have the markings and the identification of somebody like this, I'm not alone. I've gone in a number of times, John, and said, we're losing. Who's we? You and me, Mr. Champion, me and Mrs. Champion. We're losing. And I always felt really confident, not aggressive, not not pushy or anything. But I would always say, this criteria has changed. And only way criteria changes is with power and influence. And since you weren't aware of it, where did that power and influence come from, Mr. and Mrs. Champion? And I always felt like I was never alone. I had somebody that had a vested interest in my success, and I had a vested interest in their success. Does that resonate?
Yeah, well, if something's changing in the criteria, it means you're not in control. You and your champion aren't in control. So do you really have a champion? Or are they just a coach? But certainly you're not in control because somebody added something to the criteria that you didn't know was going to get added. Who added it? Why did they add it? What pain is that solving? How does that align to your differentiators? Or is it just aligned to the competition's differentiators and they just threw it in because the competition's champion is strong? Why is it there? If your champion went through or supposed champion went through all the pains in that process and you've aligned your differentiators to solve those, how could there be something else? Why is it needed? But one thing's for sure. You're either not in control or you're losing control.
Awesome. Johnny, I have a t-shirt, one of my favorite t-shirts. I'm big on t-shirts. I send Johnny a few t-shirts every month and kind of motivates us. But one of my favorite ones is nobody's coming. Do you have that feeling when you're a rep and you're like in the middle of all the things we're talking about and you're thinking, nobody's coming? It's not true. Like a champion, you shouldn't be in that position where you're thinking nobody's coming because there's somebody else that's in the boat with you. And if they're not in the boat with you, they're not a champion or you haven't done a good job of putting them in the boat with you. Johnny, any great last words that you want to share with us before we sign off?
All good, buddy.
You killed it, dude. You killed it. Well, I wanted to do this podcast. We wanted to do this podcast to go a little bit deeper into some of the how and the how we can do that. I also suggest, Johnny, I think hopefully you think this is a good idea. I think the next time you're going to do a forecast session, the next time you're going to do a QBR or whatever, you do a couple things. Number one, you go out and get the book, buy the book, Qualified Sales Leader, for everybody on the team. Make that mandatory reading. I'm seeing it around the world anyways. Most elite companies are doing that. Second thing I would do is this podcast right here, I'd make it required prep for the next forecast meeting or for the next QBR that you do. And just that way you'll get common language and common thought around what's great. So Johnny, thank you again for sharing with us your great wisdom. And thank you all.
Those are scars of experience is what they really are.
Scars of experience. You got it. And I'd just like to thank everybody for continuing to listen to Revenue Builder.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to check us out at forcemanagement.com.